welcome into the State of Purple and the State of Purple podcast. He's Jack Day. I'm AJ Mansour. This is the State of Purple podcast, KFAN's Minnesota Vikings podcast. We head into week number 9. The Minnesota Vikings on the road this weekend against the Washington Commanders. Not a great team, but a dangerous team because they're all dangerous in the NFL, right, Jack?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a sneakier type game for the Vikings too, because if you look at the schedule, you always talk about trap games, and it always seems like you have your eyes on something further down the road. And I could see the Vikings being in that situation right now because they have a doozy of a schedule. I mean, it hasn't been the scariest schedule to get to the 6-1 record, but it's going to get a little bit more frightening here in the upcoming weeks.
Sure is. Next week, the Buffalo Bills and the Cowboys after that, the Patriots after that, and the upstart surprising New York Jets even. You can't take them for granted. So it will get a little more difficult, but the task at hand right now is the Washington Commanders. A road game. The Minnesota Vikings carry in a 5-game winning streak, look to extend that to number 6. A lot of the national pundits are going to pick them to win this game. But, Jack, you mentioned that it isn't necessarily a trap game, but potentially a dangerous game. There was the thought that this game might be more dangerous. This team might be more dangerous because Taylor Heinicke is still the quarterback rather than Carson Wentz. Do you agree with that thought?
I think I do. And I don't know if it's a testament of necessarily me as a Vikings follower thinking that Taylor Heinicke is scary per se, but it's me as a Carson Wentz observer, if you will, just thinking that it can't get much worse than Carson Wentz. I've never been a huge Carson Wentz guy. I remember getting in arguments about him look at me finding some way to bring up the NFL draft into a conversation in early November. But yeah, I have never been a huge fan. I know he had the big year in Philadelphia where he was putting up MVP type numbers, but that's not the same Carson Wentz that we saw that one year in Philadelphia. And I think the Commanders are slightly a better team. And I don't know if you saw this, but Taylor Heinicke has been buying a pair of Jordans after every team that he beats. And let's hope for the sake of all of Minnesota that he doesn't get to buy a pair in his former team's colors.
Well, he might kick him through a window and, miss a couple games if he does that too. But, one of my favorite things, Jack, to do is for these away games is as we're watching on the TV, kind of look at the screen and see all the Vikings fans in these stands. And most of the time we're seeing the Vikings fans that are out there donning their purple and gold apparel. And a lot of times it includes Soda Stick apparel. And Soda Stick, the official sponsor of the State of Purple podcast. You can head to sodastick.com right now and check out their Minnesota-inspired goods and use the promo code KFAN to save 15% on your order. So if you're headed to Washington, D.C., or maybe you're looking forward to a future game, home game in Minnesota or away game on the road later this season, get your Soda Stick gear right now and take 15% off with the promo code KFAN at the checkout. That's the particulars. Those are out of the way, Jack.
You saying that just reminded me something. My brother's actually going to be in attendance at this game. I think he bought.
Oh, nice.
I think they're like row 2 behind the Vikings bench. He lives in Virginia, so I think it's like a 3-hour drive, he said, for him, I believe. So he'll be there, and I know he has that Randy Moss shirt down on the bottom of the screen already. So
there you go.
Maybe there will be one front and center.
Well, I'll be on the lookout for that as well. But if you get a picture of your brother, pause that DVR and tweet that sucker out so we can all appreciate him and what he's doing as well. So, Jack, you mentioned Taylor Heinicke. We talked about Taylor Heinicke and what he might do a little differently. One of the things that he's done differently for the past 2 weeks, at least, which Carson Wentz, for whatever reason, wasn't doing, was lean on Terry McLaurin, one of the good wide receivers for this team. Terry McLaurin has been involved in the offense the last 2 weeks. They've got the rookie running back Brian Robinson in the mix. The Antonio Gibson is still in the mix, now catching passes out of the backfield. There are pieces to this Washington offense that can be dangerous. The defense on that side of the for the Washington Commanders as well is solid, right? It used to be one of those vaunted defenses that we thought was going to be awful. I'm sorry, they were awful last year. I was kind of getting ahead of myself. We thought that they were going to be really good. They ended up being awful last year. They've taken a couple steps back towards the front here. But the Minnesota Vikings, who have not put together a completely solid game yet this season, this is an opportunity to do that, or an opportunity to play down to your competition. Both of those things could dictate the way that this team goes into the future.
Yeah, and I think there's some other names too. Curtis Samuel is another one who's he's been
finally healthy.
I don't even know if journeyman wide receiver is necessarily the right way to explain him, but maybe he's just dealt with injuries more, but he's been good. I think him and Terry McLaurin actually played at Ohio State together, if I'm remembering correctly. And
The
Logan
only journey that Curtis Samuel has taken in the last 3 years is from my fantasy bench to my fantasy IR and back and forth about 10 times. So the fact that he's healthy is a big surprise, but a solid player, like you mentioned, when he is healthy.
Yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I saw it look like Logan Thomas might be ready to go too. He's kind of a mismatched tight end. Again, this
Another
is
comment
the
there.
whole
Yeah.
Washington team. It when healthy, but I have a feeling about this game, and I've said this before, and I'm not going to go as far as saying I really think this is going to necessarily be a get right game for the Vikings, because I don't know. I have a feeling it's going to not be a 1-score game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I think the Vikings are going to make their fans feel a little bit less of the heart pounding out of their chest type situation. And I think Kirk Cousins is going to have a good game. We haven't really been able to necessarily say, I guess he's had some good games, but he hasn't had that great game. We jerk about Kirktober all the time, and Kirktober, it wasn't the same. I actually did the math. I know I brought this up on the last show
Yeah.
because I was curious about it, but it actually, Kirk Cousins is on pace right now to have his worst season in Minnesota, give or take a few yards potentially, but he hasn't been playing his best football. And I think there's a new acquisition that I don't know how much it's going to help this weekend per se, but I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this as well, because I absolutely love the TJ Hawkinson trade. I actually got my first article up on KFAN.com, and the first time in what seems like a very long time, but I'm excited about it. I think it gives this offense another element that it really didn't have, kind of like we were expecting it to have with Irv Smith Jr., but it never got there. And he brings a different element where he's a yak monster. And I think that's going to do wonders for Kirk Cousins.
Well, it certainly can. I mean, we talked about in the last podcast as we were getting ready for that trade deadline, kind of getting set for what this team could do. And we both mentioned the idea of them bringing in another pass catching threat. We had thought maybe it was going to be a wide receiver. There was some rumors going around. Turns out that it ends up being a big pass catching tight end that we've seen quite often. I mean, obviously, I'm loading in right now, and we'll get to it in a second here for those watching on the stream here. It's too big of a file, so I can't do that. I was going to share the video that I had posted earlier this week about the highlight reel for TJ Hawkinson, and many of those catches were against the Minnesota Vikings. Clearly, division opponents, you face them twice a year. Most of his career has been against NFC North opponents, so that's not surprising. But we're very familiar with the threat of TJ Hawkinson. And when you go to KFAN Twitter and you find this video, or TikTok or wherever, and you find this video that I'm referencing, the one thing that you're going to notice, Jack, is the biggest issue that we've had with our prior tight ends. We go back to Kyle Rudolph for sure, into Irv Smith, is most of the time when those guys caught the ball, they were squared up to the line of scrimmage, which means they ran out of a post route and they turned around and faced the quarterback and caught the ball with no forward momentum. If you watch these highlight reels, again, they're highlight reels. I get that. So these are like the best opportunities and the best catches. But almost every catch, whether he's being tackled as he's catching it or he's in the end zone or whatever, for TJ Hawkinson, has him with forward momentum where the quarterback can lead him with the ball. He can get yards after the catch, most similarly to a wide receiver in the way that they catch the ball and try and keep that momentum going, hit them in stride, keep them going forward, and get them down the football field. Now, you might give up a little bit. He doesn't sound like he's the best blocking tight end, but that's what you got other guys for. You have other opportunities there. This gives Kirk another weapon, and I think that this is going to, I don't know if it's going to be this weekend because there's still a lot to learn in this playbook, but it's going to make this offense look a lot different. Would you agree with that?
I do, and we've already seen Kevin O'Connell kind of work his mastermind in the red zone. This just blows the red zone offense kind of out of the water, in my opinion, too, because you have another target. And I've always been high on TJ Hawkinson. He was an eighth overall pick out of the University of Iowa, who seems to just kind of spew tight end talent out of it. But I think he's just going to, like you said, he's going to bring a different element to this offense. And on top of it, he's been good in Detroit, but there's a lot of people saying on the Detroit side of this that he never turned out to reach his full potential that everybody was kind of expecting him to be, the Gronkowskis and Kelseys of the world. I don't want to, if you're a Detroit Lions fan, cover your ears, but he was playing with the Detroit Lions. He wasn't playing with higher end talent. He's going to be in an offense now with Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook, who are arguably probably the best wide receiver and best running back that he's ever been a part of. And on top of that, you still have Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne who are playing well. And I wanted to bring up a tweet that I saw, and I actually used this in my article as well, if this is going to load. Our friend Kevin Seifert at ESPN, he tweeted something, and he talked about TJ Hawkinson. He leads the NFL tight ends with an average of 15.2 yards per catch. That's due largely to an average of 8.3 yards after the catch. So going back to what you were saying there, he's averaging over half of his yards per catch after catching the football. And that's just something that we haven't been able to see as a follower of the Minnesota Vikings, because as you mentioned, it's been Kyle Rudolph, and we kind of expected to see more of that out of Irv Smith Jr., but it never got to that point. So I think it's very fair to say that it brings a different element to this offense that's going to really create mismatches for opposing defenses.
Oh, for sure. And, if you're watching on the video stream right now, you'll see this video we were referencing, these catches of Hawkinson getting the ball in flow and going. So once we have this opportunity, we've talked for weeks now about how this team just needs the opportunity to, put together a full offensive slate. We've seen the bits and pieces. The running back does something, the tight end does something, the wide receiver does something. Kirk has a good game, then a bad game. Those scenarios are going to play themselves out as we go into the season further, and they start to get a full master's grasp, on the playbook that Kevin O'Connell is bringing to the table. Now you have another dynamic threat that you can add to that mix. You add in KJ Osborne, you add in TJ Hawkinson, then you can supplement with Adam Thielen. All that will take attention away from Justin Jefferson, should open him up a little bit. It'll give Dalvin Cook the opportunity to run the ball a little bit better, and obviously, get opportunities for himself there too to open up that running game. And you have then the ability to do exactly what this offense was meant to do that they haven't been able to do. So hopefully we don't have to keep saying this, Jack, week in and week out, that, they're winning, but they're not playing their best football. And can you imagine what it's going to look like when they play their best football? Maybe this is that weekend. Maybe this is that weekend that they can do it, and then they can lead that into a big game against Buffalo next week, because Washington is there for the picking. I mean, we look at the health report. We talked about it at the beginning of the game. The beginning of our podcast today. Minnesota Vikings will be without, defensive lineman Dalvin Tomlinson. Cam Dantzler and Jalen Naylor are questionable, but they both practiced in full today, it sounded like. So they should be expected to play. But when you look at the Commanders, they are without Jahan Dotson, their young wide receiver. They are without two starting linebackers in Cole Holcomb and David Mayo, already ruled out. J.D. McKissick, the pass-catching running back, is ruled out. Chase Young, already out for a long period of time. So you have this, I'm looking even at their depth chart. I think their middle linebacker, Cole Holcomb, already out. The backup, Milo Eifler, on IR. Drew White, the third stringer, already on IR. So I don't even know who's going to play middle linebacker for them, but they are carrying in some injuries. The Vikings were bit for the first time by the injury bug, but they're also there for the pick in this Washington defense that never has lived up to the expectations, and they're hurt.
Yeah, and on top of the linebacker situation, that was something I was looking at before this, just a tad bit, because I was curious to see what their defense looks like when those guys are healthy. They're allowing 4.6 yards per carry, their defense is, and Dalvin Cook is coming off of a pretty strong showing against the Cardinals. So I think there's a recipe where we could see Dalvin Cook have another big game on the ground, and I really want to see more of utilizing, if that happens. I'd love to see more of Kirk Cousins using some play action. And if Hawkinson, depending on how much of the playbook that he's already picked up, the thing that I'm most excited about with him is if you utilize that presence. I don't think the Vikings necessarily had a true threat across the middle at the tight end position, with Irv Smith Jr. still kind of getting caught up to football speed and Johnny Munt. I think TJ Hawkinson it's going to force defenses to hone in on that position a little bit more. And it's only going to open up more down the field for guys like Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborne, and Adam Thielen. So I'm very excited about that. And I think this defense is exposable as well, both on the ground and through the air. They have Benjamin St-Juste, who Gophers fans remember him. I think he was a part of that. I want to say he was on that 2017 team that was so good, but I think he's kind of had his ups and downs in the NFL thus far, and I think that's another mismatch where the Vikings can hone in, and maybe we see a big game out of Justin Jefferson as well.
I believe that he was the Commander player that donned the cheese head after they beat Green Bay as well. So Vikings fans are appreciative of those efforts.
I didn't see that. I only saw the Sauce Gardner one. I didn't know Washington did it as well.
I think that the week after, when they lost to Washington, it was St. Just, because I remember there was a Minnesota tie as well, to that opportunity there. But Jack, earlier this week on our Week 8 recap show, we talked about the kicking situation with Greg Joseph. Nothing has been done. There has been no competition to this date. There has been no opportunities for, trade deadline came and went. There was no kicking situation there. But there was an interesting situation where they did bring in a punter to work out this week. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're challenging the current punter in Ryan Wright, but tell me a little bit about why they might have brought that punter into the fold.
Yeah, I haven't done a ton of research on this, as well as, special teams aren't
Throwing you under the bus
my
a little bit
strong
here,
talking point, but I do remember seeing a tweet, and I don't remember, it was from one of the main beat reporters, and I apologize for not remembering who it came from, but if I'm remembering correctly, I think the Washington Commanders have a left-footed punter. So it was kind of a weird scenario where the Vikings are like, hey, let's bring in, I don't think, if there's anyone's job on the special team side of the ball, Ryan Wright should probably be as far away from competition as possible, in my opinion. I think he's done an outstanding job punting the football for the Vikings. And I think that it was more or less giving Jalen Reagor some chances to catch the ball off a left-footed punter, because on top of things getting a little bit weird with the foot switching this week, Jalen Reagor is muffed, just off the top of my head, I think there's been at least 2. So at least getting him kind of used to the different spin that the football is going to be coming in, and hopefully it works out and we don't see Jalen Reagor muff a punt on Sunday.
Multiple reporters, our guest from a couple of weeks ago, Will Ragatz, I know Dustin Baker, they all commented on that. It sounds like that's what it was, right? To get the spin is different off the foot of a left-footed punter. So get a little insight there to kind of make sure that you have that thing shored up when you go to Washington this weekend. But it's just another interesting thing to mix in there and prepare for when you try not to overthink these things, but you end up overthinking everything. Jack, before we head out here, I do have a comment from the chat. Actually, I'm going to pull this one up here. Andrew Ortiz, who's watching on Facebook right now, comments and makes a note that the Vikings right now are only a 3-point favorite on the road, obviously. So you factor in, I think they say it's about 3 points, so maybe a 6-point favorite. But when you talk about the spread being Vikings -3, how do you feel about that? Do you think that that is because Washington has started to play a little bit better, or Minnesota hasn't really put anybody away yet this season?
I think the Vikings are going to cover that with, I don't want to say ease, but I think they're going to cover by quite a few
never
points.
say with ease with this team.
But I will say, for the Vegas odds, I think they're completely fair, because this Vikings team, as good or bad as you think they might be, sitting at 6-1, is it all 6 of their wins have come in 1-score games? If I was Vegas, there's no way that I would actually. I guess the Packers game wasn't a 1-score game.
That might have been the only one, right? Yeah.
Okay, so the 5 other games that they've won have been 1-score games, and I think if you're sitting in the Vegas books making these spreads, I don't think there's any possible way you're going to look at how the Vikings have played. And I don't want to, with what I'm going to say, I can come out and kind of say my score prediction. I think the Vikings win this one 27-17. So it's not like they're going out and absolutely saying, hey, you know what, we're done with these 1-score games, which that would be a 2-score game. It's barely out of that 1-score range, but I think the Vikings are a good enough football team where they're going to go and they're going to take care of business. Having said that, I do think the Commanders, they have a lot of this like scrappiness to that team. I don't know if you saw their win against the Colts last weekend was an epic comeback fashion where Heineke just slung it downfield and McLaurin went up and got the football, and they don't have any quit in them either. And I think we're going to be in for a fairly decent football game, but I just am starting to buy in every week more and more to this new Kevin O'Connell regime. And I think eventually we're going to have to see this team kind of start to click. I think if you go back to that 2017 season, the Vikings started 2-2, and then they went on this big run where they took care of the teams that they were supposed to beat. This is one of those games where the Vikings, this is a big game, get them to 7-1, and then you go to Buffalo next week. Again, don't look ahead to that game quite yet, but it's a bigger game than people are realizing because of how hard the schedule gets in the upcoming weeks.
Absolutely. And you're not alone in those thoughts. Pat McAfee earlier this week gave the praise to Kevin O'Connell and the Minnesota Vikings. A lot of the power rankings that came out this week had the Minnesota Vikings, let's call it top 5, but some of them even up to the top 3, behind the Eagles and Buffalo. So they're starting to gain some steam and gain some momentum right there. When you talk about point predictions, Jack, I'm going to give you mine as well. I think this will be the blowout game that you kind of predicted a little bit, but I'm going to go even further. I'm going to say it's going to be a 29-10 game. How do we get to 29 points, you might ask? Missed extra point, clearly. I mean, that's the most common thing that's going to happen to this team. So it should be 30, but it'll end up being 29-10 because Greg Joseph's going to doink another extra point off the upright. But safe to say we feel good about this game, right?
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, I don't think it's one that the team or their fans should necessarily be sleeping on, because that's not what you want to do. Vikings fans are all fully aware of that. But I think it should be a game where, again, you look at both teams. The Vikings are the better team on paper, and I think they've been the better performing team this season. And this is a completely unexpected start to the season for, I think it's safe to say, the NFC North, that the Vikings having as big of a lead as they have. But the NFC East, no one was predicting them to have. They don't have a team with a losing record, if I'm remembering correctly. I think Washington's 4-4, and they're in last place. And then the Vikings have to play the other 3 teams in that division as well, with Dallas, or they already played Philly, but Dallas and the surprising New York Giants too. So completely surprising division. But again, I think the Vikings are the better team. It's going to be another test where they have to go on the road, and Greg Joseph is going to have to kick field goals outdoors, which scares me a little bit as well. But I feel comfortable, and I think the Vikings have the better football team, and I think they're going to go into Washington and win it fairly comfortably.
If they do improve, I think I heard PA say this morning, to 7-1 on the season. They will have the best start since the team had in 2009, and then before that in 1998. The last time the team went 7-1 to start a season. So
the last time the team rode off into the sunset.
Right. We all know what happened with those teams. Hopefully this is a little different, but similar in some respects as well. All right, Jack, let's tie a bow on it there. We'll call it a wrap for this week on the State of Purple podcast. Make sure you follow Jack throughout the weekend and during the football game on Sunday on Twitter at Jack_H_day. You can get all his insight and opinions there. You can follow me at AJKFAN on Twitter, and make sure you subscribe to the State of Purple podcast too. Wherever you get your favorite podcasts, hit that follow, hit that subscribe button, and you'll get new episodes delivered straight to your inbox when they're up there. And you can check out old episodes to see some of the stupid predictions we've made, or some of the good predictions we've made in weeks past as well. All right, Jack, Skull Vikings, let's go get win number 7 and continue this momentum as we prepare for Buffalo next week. All right, we'll see you later, man.
See ya.